and welcome to this plant engineering video conversation. I'm your host, Amara Rozgis, and I've connected with Marc Elliott from Eaton. This is part of the Maintaining Your Plant Floor Edge series, which focuses on manufacturing plant maintenance, and we'll tackle it from a lot of different angles in this video series. So thanks so much for joining me today, Marc.
Amara, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for making the time.
Excellent. Well, here's a little bit of background about my guest. Marc Elliott has more than 25 years of experience with Eaton, serving in roles of increasing responsibilities, including sales engineer, product manager, engineering manager, regional sales manager, and plant manager before being appointed to his current role as marketing director, mining metals and minerals and pulp, paper, and wood, which is part of Eaton's electrical business. Marc has a broad range of experience with industry solutions related to power distribution, energy management, motor control, and factory automation, serving the process industries, OEMs, and institutions. So I'm happy that we're speaking today, Marc, and it sounds like we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in the electrical industry, and certainly, what we're going to talk about today is a hot topic with a lot of our customers and even with our own facilities. So let's have at it.
Right. So let's start with basics. What are some of the current trends in maintenance for industrial and manufacturing facilities? What are you seeing?
Yeah, currently there's, I would say, kind of three things for us to talk through in order. Safety's never become out of vogue. So we'll share a little bit about that. There's certainly some advancements to codes and standards, and digitalization continues to be a trend that we're watching over that currently impact things. So first from a safety standpoint, it remains an ongoing priority. I think that there's an increased vigilance, though, when we look at how companies incorporate safety programs into their ESG strategies around how they protect people and plants, but they're also now promoting it, and they're promoting it for lots of reasons. One is because it is of key importance to them. It never has not been, but it's relevant now to share that outward of what efforts they're doing, and that's important to their own talent as well as recruiting talent, whatever it might be. So safety is still a very important trend in the industry. When we look at electrical codes and standards, those are always evolving with the idea that's for the betterment of the industry. I think most recently we could talk through the National Fire Protection Association, which is known as NFPA 70B, and 70B very recently, January of 23, moved from a recommended practice to a mandatory practice. And for those that know that means that now there's requirements as an end user, as a facility, to do that. And NFPA 70B specifically goes through what electrical maintenance program would look like. So it goes from a should to a shall. So now there's requirements to it. So while we know that that requires manufacturers to spend more time on their maintenance, we believe, and so does NFPA, that in the long run, this is actually a positive to the industry. It ties in closely with what we've been using for years with NFPA 70E, which is on the electrical safety of the workplace, which really talks about the equipment itself and following properly installed equipment, whatnot. But 70B now then takes a look at the piece of it of now that it's installed in your facility and the wear and tear on it, how do I properly maintain it? So more attention and even some more formalization to electrical maintenance programs is certainly a current trend that's really important to industrial manufacturing facilities.
Okay, so break out your crystal ball now, Marc. What future trends should engineers or plant managers expect for predictive or preventive maintenance? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I think when we look at kind of crosses the path of both the current and future is digitalization. Digitalization for industrials is really around now conditional monitoring. Conditional monitoring systems is called out specifically in NFPA 70B with a new term called condition of maintenance. And condition of maintenance means now that companies are looking at the equipment as how it operates today on an ongoing basis to decide what those maintenance programs look like. And then we look at that digitalization piece. Then there's also pieces around, asset management tools that allow us to identify and track those assets. And that's important because then we know what is there versus going out to visit on the site. And then there's a proliferation of, continuous monitoring equipment to help us do this. But when I look at, other the big picture future trends, as a former plant manager, that's really important to me because I think the continuous improvement around the maintenance activities is key to the success of any operation. It's so important for uptime, in these facilities, especially in the ones I work with the continuous process industry. You can't make up that lost time. So your maintenance team is of critical importance. And what we're seeing is, the future trends of what energy transition and electrification means to these folks. So from an electrification standpoint, what it means is more of the energy sources inside the facility are converting to electrical. Well, that means that now that's a bigger piece of the pie, even more relevant, more important that you take care of it. But also means it becomes more complex. So that drives the need really for that maintenance program, which really, again, puts us right in line with what NFPA 70B is recognizing. So, continuing to train and develop and create that maintenance program is really important. The good news, I think, is that, as the equipment becomes more intelligent, you have more opportunities now to pull that into your maintenance program. And I think we might talk about that a little bit later in more detail. But I think the other piece of that is, future trends around sustainability. And sustainability programs have always kind of traditionally been part of maintenance programs, but more so from a continuity of service perspective. And now that's moving into including that into this environmental and governance initiatives within companies, which I would phrase that now that's called the energy transition, right? So sustainability goals drive the desire to integrate renewables, which is a great thing for lots of reasons as you electrify your infrastructure, but it also increases the complexity as well. So the properly done, however, creating a more robust electrical infrastructure that uses renewables as part of your grid actually will increase your reliability internally as well. But in order to do that, you have to somewhat digitalize to be able to monitor these assets and these energy sources. So it's essential that the plant engineers, the plant managers, and certainly the key resources, talent such as the maintenance team need to be up to speed on what does that future state look like as I digitalize, electrify my infrastructure.
Yeah, good point. So what does that future state look like? I mean, think about twins, digital threads. How does that fit into the maintenance strategy?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, from my experience, manufacturers are looking to get intelligence out of their system. It's not new to do this. There's been different tools over the years to pull data out of the system. And there's still a wide range of just how much data and how effective it is at different end users, different end customers, facilities. But the need is there as well to kind of clear the clutter, right? So I have more and more the ability as an end consumer, as a producer, to collect data, but does that really give me my competitive edge where I get predictive capabilities out of it? So I think we're trending that way. I think regardless of the tools you use, it's important to focus on how you're creating value. And I go back to that because I say, because just because digital twins or threads are popular doesn't mean it's necessarily the right investment for each manufacturer or at this time. So we've done recent research with S&P Global that shows that is priority, that these producers, the manufacturers are investing into their digitalization, and the digital twin and thread is part of that. But it's third on the rank of what's important. And I think that when we look at the big picture of it, the digital twin might be a byproduct of your strategy, but may not be the end goal. Be careful that we get excited to say, I want to create this digital twin, not necessarily knowing what the value would be. So I think one approach to that is you talk about to digitalize as you build out your infrastructure. So That's to say that implementing a digital twin or thread might occur over time to your ecosystem, but start with the aging infrastructure. You've got lots of different equipment that's going to connect in different ways. The first pass, in my opinion, would be to look at how you modernize the equipment there, build that out, make it more intelligent, and then do a feasibility study. Then look how you create a digital twin or whatever that digital network should look like.
Okay, so you just touched on this a little bit, but let's take a step back. When you're looking at effective maintenance strategies, what are they? What are the advantages? What should folks look at?
Yeah, I think there's some of these are tried and true, and I think there's a new twist to it. Maybe we can add to it, but the concept around insourcing, which you're great at, and outsourcing or getting help where you may not have all those expertise is still very relevant. I think as we play into that, recognizing that maintenance staffs today are challenged with turnover of talent, as well as just enough resources. Period. So they wear more hats and across lots of disciplines. And I think if we honed in on like electrical piece of that in particular, um, we probably all know read, but it's true that most of electrical accidents occur with non-electrical people working on or around electrical equipment. That doesn't mean that your electrical experts don't also unfortunately have those accidents. But the fact is that any accident's too many, and generally, while electrical issues are of low occurrence, they're of high severity. So it goes back to those maintenance strategies: is looking at where you've insourced it and making sure that there's training programs in place to help them as not only this infrastructure gets more complex, but potentially we've got a turnover of talent to get them up to speed. And then I think then you look at things like, well, how do I build out that maintenance program? And that strategy more and more needs to be looking at how you get resources to help you do that. And again, that may not be core to your capabilities to know how to do electrical testing, performance, conditional maintenance programs, but let alone just how to properly update and modernize equipment that, as they get old and fail, can turn into a maintenance and or safety issue. So I think to consider of moving as best we can to conditional maintenance is key. It's more effective to the end user than it would be to do on a typical cycle. And I think one strategy is we think about for all of us that are old enough to have cars that you would get an oil change every 3,000 or 5,000 miles. It would be regardless of what the wear and tear was on the car itself. So what we realize today is that based on the conditions of that, how the car is being operated, the environment that it's in, how hard the car was run, how long of a time it's been. Cars don't tell you at 3,000 miles to go to an oil change. They tell you when the oil is starting to degrade. And we're seeing that same opportunity in the electrical infrastructure. And it's a better strategy. But to get there, you got to shift into some digitalization of the infrastructure for equipment, and you know how to use it. So when you look at those maintenance strategies, certainly recognizing where your strengths are, train those folks to be good at that, and then realize that part of that win is to embrace the digitalization where it makes sense in your organization.
I'm glad you brought up older cars. Let's talk about older buildings. So an existing building, existing facility, and you're talking about vintage equipment, keeping it operational. How do you add in the digitalization without completely disrupting the processes that go on in that building?
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think it's very relevant to so many of our industrial facilities. We have a wide range of modern and rather dated equipment at times because it still is running and it's expensive to replace and whatnot. So the digital transformation is certainly a key element about the digital transformation. So modernizing your equipment as you maintain it is a strategy I would strongly suggest that we've seen success with. If vintage equipment is part of the critical path of your operation, which in many cases it is, you got to ensure its reliability. It doesn't matter who made it or how old it is. You have to make sure it's up and running. at all times. And there's not always the cash or time to replace it, take it out of service. So there's ways to look at kind of that life cycle assessment of the equipment and decide how and when to do some sort of modernization replacement. What I would suggest too is as you do that, there's tools today that enable that that process. So when we look at equipment coming out today, there's things like breaker health algorithms they're inherent to circuit breakers that can actually now tell you when they need attention or replacement. And then we look at things like partial discharge would be a very common, practice to do periodically in your maintenance program. Well, now I can do that continuously, and that will tell me when I'm trending towards installation breakdowns, which can cause all sorts of catastrophic electrical failures or just a degradation in your network. And then there's things like continuous thermal monitoring that allows you to remotely, monitor internals of your electrical infrastructure that tells you when things are starting to, in most cases, overheat due to either expansion, contraction, from electrical needs, from environmental concerns. And obviously those can lead to catastrophic failures at bus locations or cable lugs, whatnot, that we used to do in the past just to occasionally look at. So when you look at that life cycle assessment, what it's saying is that, yes, continue to still assess the equipment on some sort of a schedule, hopefully conditional based more so than just, hey, it's time. But there's tools now to look at to help you plan it ahead of time and do it as needed, not just because you said so. I think an example of that when you look at things already existing is IEEE has a standard on molded case circuit breakers on industrial applications. And that has a recommended practice for not only how you select it, but for how you monitor and take care of your breakers over time. So as simple things as cycling the breaker once a year, just make sure it's clear. But then also how and where do you look at the contact points to make sure that the breaker doesn't have some sort of issue internally that you can't see until it's too late. I think when you do that modernization, be very careful that you maintain the codes and standards of the original equipment. There's lots of opportunities, and especially like motor controller breakers, where I don't have to take it out of service, where either I can modernize it, put a replacement in, or I can add features to it, update it with a shorter term of service. So rather than taking months to get new equipment and install it, I can replace pieces, parts as I go. The danger can be that you can do work that takes the code, the UL, CSA label, where it might be, and eliminates it. That may or may not mean the equipment doesn't work properly, but it certainly does mean if there's a failure that you're unprotected there and you have additional risk. So again, it goes back to modernize as you maintain, I think is a great way to approach it. Don't try to do it all at once, and having some sort of conditional monitoring to know when and how to do that at each stage of the game is a winning combination.
Wow. Well, thank you, Mark. That's a lot to add to the checklist. I appreciate all the information.
Well, it's my pleasure. It's it's an ongoing opportunity to work through this stuff, and certainly we're here to help. We live it ourselves as well, but I think that there's some cool things on the horizon in the industry to make it a better, more effective, safer environment for everybody.
Definitely. All right. Well, that was Marc Elliott with Eaton talking about several topics related to electrical maintenance. And for more on maintaining your plant floor edge, maintenance, and other manufacturing related topics, please visit Plant Engineering at www.plantengineering.com. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.